Welcome to Conflict Managed. I'm your host, Mary Brown. Conflict Managed is a weekly podcast about toxic work environments and how to fix them. We're glad you're here. Good morning, Regina, and welcome to Conflict Managed.
Good afternoon, and it's so good here to be with you today.
I'm really looking forward to our conversation. You have been in the world of mediation for quite some time.
I have.
But before we get to all of that, I want to hear about the first job you ever had as a young person.
God, the first job I ever had. It was working in the cotton fields of Arkansas on my farm, my father's farm. Girl, chopping cotton. That's what my first job was. Woo!
Wow.
And he made us start working early because when you own a 40-acre farm and you have one person. So when you start having children, you teach your children to work early.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think we started actually chopping cotton when we was about 7 or 8. We used to go to the field with him when he went because he was the babysitter. Okay. My mom was a teacher, so she would go off to teach school. So he had these little kids behind him, and sometimes we'd be laying on his cotton sack, bless his heart, when he would be pulling it. When the chopping cotton and the time of that, he would be out chopping cotton, and he would have to tell us, stay at the end of the hole, that you'll get cut, but you were out there with him because he was the only person there with you. So you're gonna follow this man around. And so as we got a little older, you know how kids imitate their parents.
Mhm.
And so when he saw that we would pick up the hoe and we would start chopping, he would tell us, that's the cotton. Don't chop the cotton. We need to get the weed. So then he had to give us a lesson on this is weed and this is cotton. You know, it's funny what you question the things that it brought back about my father. You know,
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, what do you remember the transition from just kind of, following your dad and doing these sorts of things and relatively kind of fun, not work, to it being work?
I guess we were about 10 when we realized this was work. When my dad said, "Come on, we got to go to the fields," and we looked at him and he said, "And come on," he said, "Yeah, each one of y'all are going to get your row and you're going to chop all the weeds out." Suddenly this was no longer fun. This was actually work. So I began to see it in terms of this is work. And it was when we were 14, this is the first time my dad let us actually go off and work on somebody else's farms, chopping cotton in the summertime. And this is how you made money in rural Arkansas. Because there's no factories out there, they're only farmland. So this is how you're making a living on other people's farms. And we were 14. And the first thing my mom said was this. She said, "Now you will be buying your clothes." We went, "What?" She said, "Yes, you're making money now. When you make money, you buy your own clothes." So you thought, "Oh my God, I can go buy them shorts." And I never will forget, Nancy Sinatra was singing, "These boots are made for walking." Remember, everybody had hot pants and the little halter top. You got one boots. And my dad looked at us and said, "No, no, you're not wearing that mess out." Because, we went, "What?" And he's like, "But Dad, everybody's wearing this." My dad said, "Not you. Y'all are not wearing this out." And he had 5 daughters, and I grew up in a large family at the house. At any given moment, we had 8 children and 3 adults. So, my grandmother lived with us. And this would be after she came to live with us, it became a different world because one, we were used to like going off with him, chopping the cotton and stuff like this. Suddenly we got grandma who's trying to, she's also a leader in the house. That's a whole different set of different rules. And so it was interesting growing up, but it was fun, good life because it taught us a lot about working, the work ethic itself, being prepared for a job, being there on time, um, the things to say on a job, things not to say, that this is not foolishness and playing. I never will forget when we got ready to go off and chop on the first fields in someone else's fields. My dad, "This is a job. They will pick you up at sunup and you will come back at sundown." Now, You cannot play in the fields. You can't come home because I'm tired, Dad, and we're going home. It doesn't work that when you go off, you have to stay all day. And that was a revelation for us because typically what we would do is get up and go out, came up. But when it got 10 o'clock, we come inside. It get too hot, and my dad would be like, okay, let's go inside. All you guys go inside. And he would make all of us go inside. And then he might stay out for a while, in the heat of the day, but he didn't allow his daughters to just stay out in the heat of the day. You had to go inside. The girls must go inside. It's too hot, and so suddenly you're working away from home. And it's a different thing because you can't go in.
Mm.
You now have to work there all day.
Mm.
And
Wow.
believe me, it was very hard. That first summer we did that. Very hard learning curve. And it was those types of things. But those types of things made us into good workers.
Mm.
Whether you come to work or not, I'm going to be there. If you have to come in at 8 o'clock, I'm there at 8. I'm there at 7. I'm actually there by 7:30. I'm going to be there for this is the work day. Whether a boss comes in or anybody else comes in, it does not matter.
Mm.
I know what time my schedule is. This is what I'm supposed to do. I know tell me your rules, your rigs, and what you want, and that's what I'm going to do. So it's a good learning lessons.
Good learning lesson. And I'm wondering because this is the lesson that you took away from working on your family farm and then working on other farms. Did
Mm-hmm.
your other siblings come away with the same lessons, or is this more Regina?
Though actually, my siblings took the same lesson,
Hmm.
and they went on. Jocelyn, the oldest girl, she was a principal. Went on to become a principal. Um, she's retired now. My youngest sister, she went into technical aeronautics, got a degree in technical aeronautics from Tennessee State University. Is a Six Sigma, and she saves her companies millions of dollars because that's the way she is. That's the way she does things. And the other one was worked. My twin sister Rosa worked at a UPS for 38 years.
Hmm.
I used to envy that, that she could go to a job, and I would think, hey, I want to do that. I want to go to a job and stay there. Guess what? Not happening. I've never. The longest I worked on a job was 14 years, and guess what? During that time, I always second job, always. And it was because it didn't, one, they didn't pay a lot of money, first of all. Second of all, it wasn't what I really cared about. So I could go in and do the things I liked and did things I enjoyed on weekends.
Hmm.
I've always had worked with, because of my parents, again, they worked with communities and stuff like that. My mom being a teacher, she was the one who read all the community people's letters. They couldn't read well, so they would bring her their mail, black
Hmm.
and white, would bring their mail. And Miss Annelle helped before her. My grandmother was a teacher. She would read their mails, help them get their social security and things like that.
Hmm.
So this has been always a part of my life. So all the jobs I've ever had have been working with people.
Hmm.
And so as a result of that, my sisters, they went into education and things like that. They all did things, dealt with one working at Rose worker at UPS. She dealt with high volume, I guess they call them high volume items, things like diamonds and things like that, when they were lost and found. She worked in security, believe it or not, where they prosecuted people. And that's what she did, and she worked there for years. And so my life, I've had like over 31 jobs.
Hmm.
And I have, I go in, uh, I might work for you a week or 2 weeks. And that's why I tell you, I always envy that she could stay on a job. Because I'm like, come out of here. The longest I worked on one was 14. One before then was 3. And then since then, I'm like, nope, not going to do it. you know, and I've always been like that. But I've always had a lot of things that I did weekends, like I did a volunteer work with the Council for Humanities. And this is actually how I met Mary Ellen Bowen. She used to be over victim offender restitution programs, VORP, which got me into mediation. And I met her, and I did not come to mediation as looking for a second career. Not Well, I was never looking for a career really. Uh, no, I wasn't. But I met her when I was working with the Council for Humanities on the week we brought in the Magna Carta, and we took it on the tour of the state. So I was working with that on this was an organization, and she came up to me, and she was one of the people who came to see the Magna Carta, and she said, "I think that you would make a good mediator." And this was my response. Look, is this another one of these 501c3 things that you want me to come and work for free for you guys? Yes, I did. And Mary Ellen would tell you this. Look, Mary Ellen has her trademark. She wears pigtails and a beret. She lives out on the farm, hippie. She's a great person. And she said, "Well, yeah." I said, "Look, I got volunteer work. I am working 4 and 5 days a week. I can't do another one, add another one at this time in my life. I've got too many going on." And so, when God works on you, it's like, okay, this was 92. She came in 95. I would see her again. And she said, "Do you remember me?" And I said, "Of course I remember you. I remember those trademark pigtails. Yeah, I remember you." She said, "Well, I still think you'd be a good mediator." She said, "But I need you to come to a training." And I looked at her and I thought, do I really want to go to a training? She said it would be tonight. And so, that's pushing it, I'm like, I'm looking at thinking, what do I have I got going on? So then I went, I said, okay. And it was at a Methodist church there on South Street there in Nashville. And I got there, I thought, well, I'll sit at the back. And then she made me one of the participants. And then after that, she said, "I want you to mediate this case." After been sitting there an hour and a half. And I went, what? And so I did it. And that's how I got hooked into mediation, was through Mary Ellen Bourne, who was living on the farm and victim offender restitution programs. And I did that for the years. I would Tuesday night, I would go to Nashville's juvenile court and mediate cases for them regarding juvenile, and 2 Saturdays a month. Yes, ma'am. That's how I did it.
I love that you said you got hooked on mediation. So, for listeners who maybe don't have never been through mediation, don't know much about mediation, will you tell us what mediation is, and then
Okay.
what got you hooked on it?
I'm gonna tell you what. I've been a social worker. God help me. This is for the state of Tennessee and Memphis, Tennessee. Hated that job. That was one of those jobs, you said, "Lord, you get me out of here. I will never, ever do this again." I did not like, I loved my cases. I loved the people I worked with, but I hated all the bureaucratic craziness that goes on with the state, all these rules and regs that really don't work for people. So I was like, I don't like that. And but I found out one of the things about mediation is that usually you sit with me for 3 hours, sometimes four. I do you one time. I'm not trying to carry it. This is not a caseload I'm carrying on. If I get referrals, I did a great job. Okay. So that appeals to me, who I am, because to me, as a mediator, a person only for a moment in time. You're not meant to walk with them forever to keep resolving their issues. You walk with them to help them. You're a witness to the pain they're in. Your job is to help them get through that job. And you can help them by showing them different routes, help them by coming up with different strategies for resolving issues. But you're not going to have them carry out on a caseload with to them every week. You're not a counselor or therapist, and you got to remember that. Your job is to help them resolve this issue that day and help them move forward. That's it. And that's what I like about mediation. Mediation allows us to come in when people are at their worst, and they're often at the lowest points in their lives. They're going through a divorce or terminated on a job, and they're angry, and all these emotions. You're just identify those emotions and say, it's okay. You're going to be there to say, it's okay. You can get what your job is to do to help them get through that particular moment, to go on, to go forward. And mediation allows for people is this, it allows them to come together and find common ground. and to stop investing in the fight. Because you got to remember something. Every day you're going to be invited to a fight, but it's your choices you or do I not fight? Is this worth my time? Is this worth an argument? Is this worth me investing a lot of time into it? And oftentimes, if you examine it from that point, you will see that it's not worth your time for you to get into that. Because where is it going to lead you? You know, because one thing about an argument, when you really get into an argument, it stays for a very long time and it generates so many negative emotions. So, do you want to live with those emotions or do you want to turn this into a positive? And so, you know what? This isn't worth my time. You know,
Yeah.
sometimes you got to learn to walk away from a fight. And as mediators, we're not in that fight. Witness these people's pain. You're there to help them identify emotions, to help them to learn to communicate. And sometimes I tell people about the power of click. You're having a bad day as an ex-spouse, you're having a bad day. Call him up and push his buttons, you know? You know what you do? When you know this person is pushing your buttons deliberately, how about hanging the phone up and say, sorry, hang the phone up. Learn the power of click. You don't have to argue back with that person. You know, it takes two people to argue. We have to step back and say, you know what? I don't need to argue with them. This is what I'm arguing about. And then you get into all the emotional feeling and you don't even know what you're arguing about. You don't even see it.
I really love that, Regina, about thinking about stopping investing in the fight and counting the
Yeah.
cost. Because when we're in that conflict, we're just,
Mhm.
in some way, we've lost the compass of, we're so invested in it, right? We've got all these emotions and we've got justice on our side and we are right. But then the question is, okay, well, what's the prize you think you're going to get?
Right.
And and
Right.
is it worth, as you just so articulated so well, all that you're going to give up? And it's not over when
Mhm.
the conflict is over because the lasting effects, depending on how nuclear you went.
That's
And
correct.
I love how you just really explained the art of being a mediator, coming alongside people for a very brief time to be witness to. You're not in it. You're not taking sides. You're
That's
there
right.
to help them through so that they can
That's
move
right.
forward.
That's exactly right. We're out there, and we as mediators, we have to remember our role is not to judge. Our role is not to say, well, who's right? There are many sides in every conflict, and it's a whole lot of gray. It's never anything black and white. It is a bunch of gray, and we have to realize you're only there for just that moment in life. We're not going to be, even I can't remember most of the people I've met in mediation. I meet them one time, and I'm 95. I don't meet them again. I don't even remember their names. That's the veil that God puts over mediators' faces, is that he takes whatever their problems are and he moves. But it is also a learning experience for you as a mediator. Make no mistakes. This is the greatest learning experience you will ever have. And you're so much about you, but about people in general. And the thing that you'll learn about yourself is this: what what's important for you? What are your core values? We think we identify our core values. No, we don't. We do not. Because some things simply are unimportant to us, and because we simply have never thought about it. But when people bring their problems into mediation and you hear the problem, you have to think, why are they investing in this? How important is that to you as a mediator? In your core value, is it not? Because what is important to you will help you guide them through the process. If it's not important to you, how are you going to help somebody?
Mm-hmm.
How are you going to identify what they're feeling really?
Mm-hmm.
So oftentimes, this is a check in with us. How do we respond to another human being based on what they've just said? Body language, what is it telling you? How do we relate to that? Are we pulling back when it's something that makes us uncomfortable? Or are we leaning forward? Are we trying to help them? And there, and when comfortable, even if you are uncomfortable, you can still help another person because you know what? Now you've identified something you that you're going to have to work on.
Mhm.
You can't work on it in there, but you're going to work on it because now you found that you need to work on you. And that is one of the things that as mediators, we have to learn. We're not omnipotent. We're not gods. We're here. God has put you in a position to help a human being, a unique position. And you have to be willing to help that person. Not every case that is brought to you should you accept. You should step back from, because if you got a gut feeling and it says this case, you need to listen to that gut feeling. Because that little voice in there is God telling you, not for you.
I like that you pointed out, this idea of leaning in as the mediator, because the
Mm-hmm.
conflict is not about you. You're just there to set up the parameters to help these people through. One thing that I've noticed getting into the world of mediation is getting, for me, rid of the word petty, because I can come in and, I hear somebody's problem and I think, why is that a problem for you? Because it's not a problem for me, or I don't think of it as
Mm-hmm.
important. And for me, when I'm not in a mediation, wherever I am, and if that word petty comes to me, it's a flag, it's a notice. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
you're not seeing. You're not paying
Right.
attention. You're running somebody else's life through the lens of your life. And
Right.
this is not about you, no matter where I am,
Mm-hmm.
whether I'm in
Mm-hmm.
mediation or someplace else. Okay, so for me, it's a red flag of I'm not
Mm-hmm.
being present in this
Right.
person. I'm running them through me. And and that's something that I see when I talk to people about conflict at work is somebody else's conflict is unimportant, but mine is very important, right? Um,
You
so
do.
right.
You do find that because, and you have to be aware of that as a mediator. Back inside, sometimes you have to take a break, a pause, and say, "Excuse me, we need to take a 5-minute break." And then your break, you go to the bathroom or you go outside and say, "Okay, what's going on here?" Ask yourself, why are you saying this is why? What is this person generating in you?
Mhm,
I'm not generating.
mhm,
And sometimes you got to go back and say, "Help me to understand. I'm missing something in this. So help me to understand." And by asking them to help you to understand, they get a chance to verbalize what they're saying and what they're feeling again. And here the second time, or sometimes even a third time, you know what? Sometimes by asking them to verbalize and say to you what it is that they're really feeling, it will oftentimes float away because they stop and go, that doesn't even make sense to me. And you're like, what? Forget. People say, forget about that. I'm like, huh? But, you know, and because you got to realize it's their feelings. And where do feelings come from? Mary, feelings come from everything that has ever happened in your entire life, from conception on to this very moment that you meet this mediator. That is who you are. So I never make light of another person's feelings because you know what? Their feelings are them.
yeah.
That is who they are. Our feelings are us. You have to own who you are. And as a mediator, you have to check in constantly with you. Who are you? Core value. What are your feelings? And there's things, like I said, some things you cannot mediate
Mhm,
because of who you are. It may generate too much anger inside you.
mhm.
Push a button that you have not dealt with and are not ready to deal with.
Yeah.
And so you got to be aware that pushes buttons too. So to help them, you got to pull back. That's why you need that pause, take that break to evaluate what's going on where you are right now.
Yeah.
and then come back in renewed, refreshed, and be willing to listen to again what it is that you're saying. Help me to understand. Because in your understanding, you can then take it to the other party and try to explain it to them point of view. But if you don't understand what they're telling you, it's very hard to take that to somebody else.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So,
Mm-hmm.
Regina, you've been in this space for 30 years. How has your ability to deal with conflict, how has that shifted in the past 30 years, given all of the experiences that you've had, all the learning you've done, the boots on the ground, experiences with people. So in your own day-to-day conflict with people and organizations, how has your knowledge and your experience of mediating, maybe how you dealt with conflict in the early 90s versus how you deal with conflict now?
You know what? I think we all evolved, and I know I've evolved because I now will stop. You know, this isn't working. I'm going to take you into, and what we're going to do is you're going to tell me everything that's bothering me right now, and I'll let you talk. I mean, I'm not going to ask you anything. I'm just going to say, tell me what's going on. You tell me. Well, I don't really know, blah, blah, blah. I let them talk it all the way out. And sometimes it's 10 minutes, sometimes it's 15. But they run out of energy, they run out of steam. And until they run out of steam, you cannot talk to them because they cannot. They're still wrapped up somewhere in their own minds about, I got to say this, I got to get all this out. Okay, so being a part of a witness. So you're sitting there listening to them. You're not judging what they're saying. And some say, thank you for sharing that. Now, where do you want to go with that? And always never raise your voice in a mediation. Never, you don't have to. You forget, don't ever forget, you're in charge. If you're the mediator, you're in charge of the process. It's essential for you to be the loudest person in the room. Actually, you should be the quietest person in that room because process and everybody in that room knows it. And if they don't know it, guess what? I haven't laid the groundwork.
Right.
And believe me, I'll lay that groundwork immediately and I let you know. If I'm doing a family mediation, I do it with attorneys. I do it, insist that your attorney is present. Um, and the reason I do that is that I want you to see your attorney to see what was said, what was her, what was said, everybody said. You don't get to go back and tell the attorney, well, the mediator coerced me. No, I didn't coerce you into anything. I'm not going to coerce you into doing. And let's be honest, our clients do lie. They would tell a lie. Okay, I've had them. And but what happened, Miss Newson? I don't know. What did they tell you? you know, and if that's different what they was said, I don't know what happened in there. So I make them come. That way they get a chance, an opportunity to see me work, but more important, a chance to see who their client is. You know, and oftentimes you need to, like I've had attorneys and tell attorneys, you need to talk to your client, explain them what the real law is. What is the law in there? I will turn them to say, ask your attorney that. I'm not an attorney. I don't know what the law is, but I'm very sure that their attorney present knows.
Mhm.
Since he's representing you, ask him.
Mhm. It's so important in mediations to reality test what people want. And if yeah,
Mhm.
and mediators, insofar as they're acting as a mediator, they're not acting as the lawyer. Of course, there are a lot of attorney mediators, but as the mediator, that's not your role. But
That's
Regina,
look, and don't get to bros.
right,
Please don't,
right. It's very important.
because they get you into trouble.
Yeah, absolutely. But what about you personally? How do you deal with conflict? It's one thing to help others, to be this third party. But what about you? How do you deal with conflict? And specifically in a work context, because that's what I'm really interested in. Can you tell us about a conflict you have had and maybe earlier in your career and how you dealt with it and how you might deal with it differently today?
Yeah. When I was doing social work, you get all these people, you get complain against you if you're a social worker, you know. And I had a woman who, a child, well, yeah, I talked about his mother, and I said, and the supervisor, you can't work with him anymore. Oh, she thought, huh? I said, okay. She went, okay. I said, and she said, aren't you going to say anything? I said, no, because you've made a decision already. You just told me to work with him. So that means that you're not willing to listen to what happened that day or what was said. So, okay. And I looked at it and I said, also, I got 64 other kids on my caseload. So, boom, take him on. And she, whoa. And you surprisingly, 3 months later, same, they called and asked me, we would really like to sit down and talk with you about that. I said, really? To you about that? And they went, what? I'm not willing to talk to you about that. You made a decision. You did not ask what went on. And because of your decision, you made a mistake with me. I don't play that game. I don't play that record player over and over again. So you deal with him from now on. You took him off my caseload, deal with it. I refused to go out to the mental health center, which is where the complaint originally came from. But I did do something when I knew there was them. I had like 5 kids that was seeing therapists at that, excuse me. I moved them all out of their range. Boom, moved them. And I did. I didn't, yeah, I just quietly moved them to other mental health centers, okay? Because I'm not gonna have you report me for doing something, doing my job, and then you don't have the nerve to come to me and say to me, Regina, what's going on? What happened here? So now we are down the road 3 months. And so now they were at their beginning, there's questionable, this child's behavior is questionable. Now he's lying on the foster parents they have him with. And, he's saying all these things to go out there to talk to people at the mental health center. I'm like, what do you want me to do? Y'all the one took it over. You said, hey, you got this. I'm gonna let you have it. And so what they did was how they got me to come out there was the supervisor said, Regina, ride with me. And she didn't tell me where we were going, me out there. And they had the little boy waiting. And so he told me he saw me, and the first thing he did was ran, he hugged me. And he said, how come you don't see me anymore? I said, because of the tale you told. What did you tell these people? What happened that day? You had a visit schedule, and what happened? And then he said, my mom didn't come. I said, that's right. And what else happened? I said that I said a lot of things. Yep. What did I tell you? And he said, yeah, my mom was just experiencing some problems right now, but she really loved me. I said, what did you tell them? I told them that you said ugly things about my mother. I said, did I? And he said, no, I did. You didn't. And in the meantime, these people are sitting in this room with this two-way mirror looking at him talking to me. And they voice out of their own mouths. And so what would I do differently today? I guess I would supervise and say, look, let's talk about what happened that day. Because his mama didn't come and he was having a meltdown. And so, of course, she didn't show up and he had the meltdown. But because they took the attitude, is something wrong, you know, then uh, they moved the kid off your caseload. And the state today would have suspended me. Today, they're so stupid over at the state, they would have suspended me for that. They have suspended for that. And they said, well, we're going to do an investigation. And while they're doing the investigation, you're on suspension. You know? And so what would I do differently today? I would have said, okay, let's all sit down and talk about this. What really happened that day, you know? But instead, I was like, you moving him off my caseload. Boom, I got 64 more kids to care. I ain't worried about it. Take what's one of the 64. We want to take four of them. you know, that was
Hmm.
my attitude about it. Was
Yeah.
you want to take 20 more? I'm good. You
Hmm.
know, because I knew one, I hadn't done anything.
Yeah.
I knew that. And the second thing is I knew sooner or later all these things always come out, and I knew that would happen. And so I believe it or not, the kid guy was back on my caseload after they saw that and they realized, you know what, she didn't say anything, you know. And always things you do to harm another always end up firing, you know. And so I knew I hadn't said anything. And that's one thing about me. I don't say nothing behind your back that I your face. I am not a backstabber like that. I don't go to the supervisor on people. You did this. You know what? I'm a big girl. We having a conflict. Okay, what's your problem? Tell me what it is. Something I can work with, something I can't work with. And I don't, you come to me and say, well, you said, actually, I admit it, I own it up front. But I also will tell you, okay, this is the context in which this was said. I will bring the other party in and say, okay, let's all get together. Because the last time I had a major conflict when I was working with someone, I had the person come in who had gone to the and I said, okay, let's bring that person in. I called them and said, we need you in the executive director's office. And so she came. I said, the director just asked me about so and so and so and so and so and so. And she said, yeah. And I said, but you came out to me and you said da 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 da. And my response was, and the woman looked at her and went, did you say that? And she said, well, yeah. And I told her my response to her was this. I said, let me get you straight about something. I don't talk to the wall. If you come to me, it has coming to me because I'm not going to go in your office and talk to you about anybody or against anybody. So you have to come to me. And whatever you say, I will respond to that. You may not like my response of what I said, but the bottom line is that it was simply a response to what was stated. Now, that's how I deal with the conflict. I tend to be head on. I don't go around, I'm not going to go around to three people and talk about a conflict. Well, I don't like this person. That's a waste of time. If I'm having an issue with you, you bring it to me. I'm going to tell you what my response to you is, and that's the end of it. And you can go get the boss. It doesn't change my response. It doesn't change my answer either. It's not, to me, it's simply not a matter of wrong. It's simply a matter of this is what it is. You
Hmm.
deal with it. And if you don't like it, okay, figure out another way with it. So oftentimes, now I'm going to tell you one of the things that I do not like to have, I guess, during my life coaching, part of my life coaching is I don't like it when people are famously told you're fired. I don't like that because as a mediator, I don't like it. As a life coach, I simply abhor it. And the reason that is, Mary, that wounds a person's ego and his spirit. And to be very careful, that wound is something that stays with a person for the rest of their lives. No matter what anybody else hears or whatever else they do, they always will have that in the back of their mind. They've been fired, and being fired. Uh, it's cute on TV when you're the apprentice playing a game, but this is real life and people. You don't ever want to wound a person like that. And when I do mediations for companies, I'll say to them, this is not a good way to, this is not a good model. If you're having a problem with the person, you first need to let the person know that there's an issue here. Then you need to talk about what it is this person wants to do with the company. He may not want to be there either, but he may not have the guts or is afraid to quit. And sometimes you have to talk in terms of what do you want to do? And then if it's in your power, the company's power to do this, have them take some classes, have them take a few courses in the thing that there's interest there and help them move to something else. Oftentimes people don't quit jobs because they are afraid to quit. Coach, one thing I will tell you, you ain't married to no job, you can quit it. If it's making you mentally ill, it's sick physically, it's time to quit that. It's time to stop. Don't do this to you. You have to learn to manage and find balance in your life.
Mhm.
How can you go to a job that's making you physically ill? I can't do the work that I'm doing anymore. I'm just burnt out. Then it's time for you to evaluate, do I need to continue in this work? Ask yourself, because you got to realize something. Conflicts comes from within us. It manifests itself in the wider world, but the actual conflict comes from inside of us. So what do we want to do with this conflict? And I look at conflict as simply this. Oftentimes it's God telling you it's time for you to move, making it uncomfortable for you to stay where you are so that you will do something. And when you don't start looking for, what will he do? He will remove that job. He will force that termination or a rift, a reduction in force. Well, you knew this was coming. You saw the signs. Why didn't you start looking? Because you were afraid. And
I
when I'm
really,
doing the life coaching, I remove that fear.
I really like that way of it's sort of back to one of the first things that you said about mediation. You like, do how much more do you want to invest in this fight, right? How much
Correct.
more energy are you going to put into it? And it's the same, it can be the same in our jobs. Like you said, if you're in a toxic environment and you are getting physically and mentally ill and all of these things are going on, but you're just holding on so tightly, right? To be able to take that pause
Mm-hmm.
and what am I holding on to? What is the good here?
Right.
What would happen if I had a brighter future? Like what do I want to go towards? And I
Mm-hmm.
think that's just a really beautiful, evocative way of thinking about the present misery, right? How
Right.
much longer do you want to hold that?
Mm-hmm.
How much longer do you want to be miserable?
Mm-hmm.
Or do you want to find something new, something
That's right.
better?
And you
And
have to say it's okay to find that new.
yes. And I think about, the situation that you gave us at work where you were not supported by your colleagues.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so interesting, being accused of anything. It feels awful,
Right.
right?
It does.
But then the people around us, how they respond, has so much to do with making that situation worse,
Mm-hmm. It
manageable,
does.
blooming
Mm-hmm.
into
It
something
does.
greater. And I was talking to somebody a few months ago about a situation at her work, and she was telling me something that happened. And I thought what she was going to say about the situation was, you know, so what she said was bad about the situation is that her boss didn't have her back. It wasn't what I expected. But it's so true that when we see,
Mm-hmm.
it's like this lack of trust. It's like all of a sudden we see the
Mm-hmm.
writing on the wall. Oh, these people aren't for me. These
Right.
people, like in your situation, they didn't ask me. They
Uh-huh.
assumed that this child
They
was
just
telling the
assume.
truth.
Mm,
And, of course, we want to listen to people, but we need to listen to all the people
that's
instead of
right.
saying the child's a liar, this other person's a liar, right? And if we don't do that, the kind of damage that happens when we damage
It
people's
does.
reputation, or just we break
Correct.
that trust.
We break that trust. And I know for me, with that particular supervisor, thank God she was only temporary. I like her after that. And there's a bridge you can cross with me and you can't come back across. Okay. And I think that's true in everybody.
Mhm.
Uh, as long as you are talking to me and you can ask me a question, I'm going to answer it because I'm not going to tell you a lie. I don't have time for the lies. I got too many. At that point in my life, I had too many cases, 65 cases. Don't tell me I ain't got time to lie because, baby, I can't keep up with the lie. That's just the way it is. Uh, for me, I didn't trust her. You worked with me, and you've seen the work I do, and you didn't come and ask me. You just automatically assume that what these people are telling you. So now here you are 3 months down the road, and the same supervisor had to go with me. And I just told her point blank, I don't want to. Why would I go anywhere with you? You don't have my back. You don't trust me. You think you assume so. So that puts a wedge there, you know, and the trust, and especially in an employment issues. Once that trust is broken, I personally have never seen that trust regained.
Mm.
And the reason the person doesn't feel can be trusted is generally they go back and they do something else, which says, see there, you can't trust that person. You
Hmm.
know, back on one instance, he's not going to have your back on another instance either.
Mm.
And he could not necessarily not like you. It's just that it's not about liking.
Hmm.
That's I'm a supervisor and this is what was brought to me. So this is what I have to do.
Hmm.
And they will tell you, well, it's not, but you got to realize something. When you're damaging people's reputation, it's always personal.
Hmm.
When you're a man, it's always personal
Yeah.
because it's personal to that man who just got fired, who no longer has a job, and in a month's time is not going to have a paycheck. So it is personal to him.
Yeah.
So you got to realize this is personal.
Right.
And that's why they always feel that it's personal because even though the supervisor, it was not personal. We just riffed 40 people. It might not be personal to the supervisor who, believe me, the man who's not going to get a paycheck in the 2 months is personal too. He's looking at, am I going to be able to pay my bills?
Yeah. And that's why it's so important to get away from this mechanistic way of thinking about work to
Mm-hmm.
people-centered work because every
Mm-hmm.
decision really has this moral import because you are dealing with people. And you could say, I'm just making a business decision. Just business decisions need to be made, right? And sometimes people need to be let go, and sometimes there's a reduction in work, and sometimes the market turn. I mean, all of these sorts of things. But
Yeah.
to, in a way, add insult to injury, like, oh, it's like you said, it's nothing personal.
Right.
Regina, I want to ask you this question. As I've been talking with you, and I've known you for a little while, we're both on Tennessee Association Professional Mediators Board. You strike me, you can correct me if I'm incorrect, that you are not conflict avoidant, that you want
No.
to just deal with conflict. Okay. My whole life I've been conflict avoidant and I've been working on it. I'm getting better these past few years. Most of the people that I come in contact with are self-proclaimed. They will say to me, very, very rarely will I find somebody who is not conflict avoidant, but I see them. I would say it's more like 90 to 10, like 90% people who say they're conflict avoidant, maybe 5% people who say they aren't. So, this is sort of the world of people. How do you navigate that? Is that frustrating? Have you just learned how to deal with it? Or maybe that's not your experience?
Most people think that they handle conflicts well, but we don't.
Yeah,
And for me personally, the hardest conflicts I have are within my family.
sure.
How do you navigate these? They're all strong personalities. And sometimes I just pull back and just say, you know what? I'm gonna have to let you do you. But in the world of conflict, I think is to avoid the conflict.
Mhm.
Keep doing things, trying to put a band-aid on something, the band-aid.
Yeah.
Sometimes you're going to have to take it out and say, and I've done this. Let me tell you, let me give you an example. I did a divorce mediation, and it was a very long and very arduous situation. Believe it or not, we did it in one day. Um, we had a problem. You need to understand what the elephant is in the room. That elephant, because until you deal with that elephant in the room, you cannot resolve the conflict.
Mhm.
The problem was these couple had a child who was an adult because this was a year marriage. And I'm done with a couple of 30-year marriages. But anyway, the kid had committed suicide.
Mhm.
And this is what caused them to go ahead and get the divorce.
Mhm.
The marriage had not been working many years, but they had stayed in it and probably would have continued until their death.
Mhm.
But when this child committed suicide, there was so much anger, so much pain. And the elephant in that room was that child's death. And so
Mhm.
we had to talk about that person. Uh, and it was very hard because
Yeah.
I've took anytime I'm dealing with a parent where I've done a couple of those kids have died, and they always have to that child. That's your elephant.
Mhm.
You're going to have to talk about that dead child. There's
Yeah.
no way. I had to take these parties literally, talk with the mother, have her talk about him, the child, in a time when it was just the two of them and their relationship. Then I did. At one point, he got so upset. The man said, "I'm gonna leave this and walk." And you know what I told him? No, why don't we walk? Walked around the block, and then we came
Mhm.
back in, and we sat down and we talked about it. And at some point, I even asked the pair, "Was a great dad? Okay, was she a good mom? She was a great mother. So let's talk about the suicide." He had begun to hear voices when he was in college. They did not know that he was started seeing a psychiatrist and was taking medication. And what happened was he graduated and quit taking the medication. I don't need this anymore. And so now that's the other issue they had to resolve it that, they didn't have to know about. Doctors don't have to tell you that your son is having these issues,
Mhm.
really bipolar, you know, he's got some other thing that's going on. They can't tell you this because he's obeying,
Right.
so they never even knew that he was
Mhm.
having this problem. And let me tell you something. We had to deal with that hours and hours of finally, when they finally got to that point, it took us 30 minutes to divide their property and get them divorced.
Mhm.
It took us 9 hours of allowing them to talk about their feelings
Mhm.
about their son. And it was hard.
Yeah.
It was hard for me as a mediator to listen.
Mhm.
Parent. And when I saw them later, ran into them by accident, told me that was the best session they had ever had and that they were grateful that they had me to do because I made them see their son in a different light. And I told them and they were so worried about him meeting them on the other side. Will he be in heaven when we get there? I told him, I said, yeah. But then that's my personal okay. I don't believe that a person who commits suicide is not going to get to the other side because I believe that you're given us hours, days, moments, and God is going to call you home and it's time to go. You're going to go, whether it's at home in the bed, you get a car in your car, somebody hits and runs over you. It doesn't matter. You're going to die. This is your time is up. This is time what you did in that middle. He had parents who loved him. And you know what? We talked about the fact that he loved them as
Mhm.
parents.
Yeah.
And that's what they needed to hold on to.
Mhm.
What find that thing, that core thing that they needed. And that was to know that their son loved him. They loved him. They had been good parents. They needed to hear that. They needed to hear each other say that.
Mhm.
And that was how they were able to come to that common ground was the discussion about their son and their love for him.
Thank you for sharing that story. I mean, an amazing example of the only way through is through. Who wants to go through that pain? Who
Nobody.
everybody wants to go around, or most of us, because it's too painful, we don't know. But the future's on the other side. The other side of what? As you said, the elephant, the core,
That's right.
what's really
That's right.
going on. It's not usually ever what's presenting, it's what that means
Mhm.
to me or what that's touching
Mhm.
in me. And until we get that, we're not really going to make, as you said, band-aids. We're not going to make progress. So,
Mm-mm.
Regina, I could talk to you forever, but our time is coming to an end. So, I'm going to end with my last question, which is,
Yes,
as you look at the future of work, what do you think needs to happen so that not only will all workers be treated with dignity and respect, because that's baseline, but that people will thrive and flourish? What do you think needs to happen?
I think that employers are going to have to work really means
Mm,
and what it is that you really want from that worker.
mm,
It's not simply about a paycheck. This man came in and put in his 40 hours, he got a paycheck. What do you need from those workers for your company to thrive? What do you need? And I think you're going to find that you're going to need to be gentler because the new workforce is not the work 40 years ago. It is not, let's make America great again in 1950s. It is not that workforce anymore. The workforce we deal with today is totally different than it was. And let me tell you, they're crushed in a lot of pain about a lot of things. So that doesn't work for them. And so because it doesn't work for them, we have to realize that I can't talk to them the way I talk to their parents or grandparents because it doesn't work for them. You don't want to wound anybody's psyche forever.
mhm.
Nobody wants to inflict a wound consciously or unconsciously on another human being. We don't want to kill them. We don't hurt them. We do not. And
Right.
so for the employer, I need you to think in terms of how can we be kinder to these people? How can we be more gentle? How can we help them through this process? This is the workforce. If this is not good for you, what do you want to be? We help you get where you need to be, knowing that you're not going to be a good fit for this company, but that means the company cannot help you get to the next level.
Mhm,
Sometimes it's best to help a man take a class in accounting.
mhm.
I'll pay for the person to go out and take another class in something else that will allow them. It's not going to kill your company. It's going to make your company stronger, but also the goodwill that's out of that.
Yeah,
Yeah, I hope that answered your part of your
no,
question.
I love it. No, that's a wonderful answer. Oh, Regina, thank you so much for spending this hour with me. It's so lovely to talk with you, and I love hearing your perspective.
Well, you're very welcome.
Well, take care.
Get together and talk again about how how to help people.
Absolutely.
Okay. All
Well,
right.
take care.
All right. Thank you. You have a great afternoon.
Regina, you are a ray of sunshine and light. Thank you so much for sharing your experiences and for the work that you've been doing for over 30 years to help people in really dark and painful situations. Thank you so much for the work that you have done and you are continuing doing. Conflict Managed is produced by Third Party Workplace Conflict Restoration Services and hosted by me, Mary Brown. You can find us online at 3pconflictrestoration.com. Come back. We have new episodes every Tuesday. And check out my book, How to Be Unprofessional at Work, Tips to Ensure Failure. If you would like to watch this episode of Conflict Managed, you can find it on YouTube at 3P Conflict Restoration. And please do me a favor and like and follow, subscribe, whatever it is on the service that you are listening to this podcast. It really helps us out. And remember, conflict is normal and expected. Let's deal with it. Until next time, take care.